We are just a couple minutes behind, but that's all right. Good afternoon. I'm so happy that that's the last time I get to officially ring that bell. Welcome to the Sedro Woolley Rotary Club, the greatest club in the... Maggie, do we have an invocation?
Dear Lord, thank you for this day, and thank you for a wonderful year with President Kristine, and just bless our upcoming year and the installation for Ruth tomorrow. Amen.
Amen. Pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And the four-way test. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? And Louis, do we have a song today? Or we still have to sing a song.
Hey, let's sing a song. I've been working on the railroad, a oldie but a goodie. Yeah, let's sing it. I've been working on the railroad all the live long day. I've been working on the railroad just to pass the time away. Can't you hear the whistle blowing? Rise up so early in the morn. Can't you hear the whistle shouting? Dinah, blow your horn. Dinah, won't you blow? Dinah, won't you blow? Dinah, won't you blow your horn? Dinah, won't you blow? Dinah, won't you blow? Dinah, won't you blow your horn? Someone's in the kitchen with Dinah. Someone's in the kitchen, I know. Someone's in the kitchen with Dinah. Sitting on the old banjo and singing fee-fi, fiddly-I-O, fee-fi, fiddly-I-O, fee-fi, fiddly-I-O, strumming on the old banjo. Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you, Ruth. I love that it's my last one and it's my favorite song, even though I don't know all the words. Okay, very quickly, do we have any visiting Rotarians today? Visiting Rotarians? No, how about guests of Rotarians? Chad? Chad needs a mic.
Hello, everybody. So my best friend Brian is here. Brian Ammons is checking out the club.
Hi, Brian.
I see Monique Brigham over there. Hey, Monique from Chamber of Commerce.
Welcome, Monique. And Joellen and I brought our kids, Piper, Reagan, Cooper, and Landon, but they're playing at the park, so. Okay, so today we are switching things up a little. We are going to handle club business after our speaker. So I just want to welcome our guests. Thank you for being here. And I'm so glad that you guys could be with us today. So it's my honor to be able to introduce today's speaker to the club. So Mike Pellicciotti, did I say it right? All right, I practiced last night. Was elected the 24th Treasurer of Washington in 2020. So as the Washington's Chief Financial Officer, Mike is dedicated to increasing government transparency, protecting Washington's financial health, and leading policies that best serve our state's working families and retirees. Before being elected state treasurer, Mike was an assistant attorney general and served North Pierce and South King counties in Washington, in the Washington House of Representatives. There, he led efforts to increase penalties for corporate crime and to get dark money out of politics. As state treasurer, Mike is leading good government reforms and policy proposals to reduce financial barriers for all Washingtonians. Last year, he was selected as a Rodell Fellow, the bipartisan recognition of America's 24 most promising local elected leaders. He has a bachelor's degree in business administration and received his master's in rural development as a United States Fulbright Scholar. His law degree is from Gonzaga, and he is a lifelong Gonzaga basketball fan. So please welcome Mike Pellicciotti to the mic.
All right. Can you all hear me okay? Does this work? Can I stand here? Does this work for those who are online? If I kind of, that way I won't be quite so far away or behind the podium. Thank you, Kristine, for the great introduction. It is great to join all of you. My name is Mike Pellicciotti. I am your state treasurer. I think this is my 54th Rotary. And, I really I enjoy them a lot. I mean, it's part of, I've done visits in each of our 39 counties. I make that a practice of getting around the state to kind of talk about what the treasurer's office does, because most folks are like, hey, we have a state treasurer. That makes sense. That's probably a good thing. It has something to do with money. But folks are like, I have no idea what the treasurer does. So if it's all right, I always talk a little bit about what the treasurer's office does, some of the things we're working on, and then open up for any questions that you have, if that works okay. Is that right? And I always make a practice. I want to start, where did Steve go? Where's your there's Steve. I always give a shout out to your treasurer, the most important member of any organization. So we give a round of applause to your treasurer real quick. Thanks, Steve, for his service. Look, the treasurer's office kind of serves three core functions. The first is, I handle certain investments for the state, for essentially state and local investments. I'm responsible for managing about $35 billion on behalf of the state and behalf of local governments, including a lot of local governments here in the community here. The second kind of core function is something called debt management. And I promise I'm going to break that down a little bit for you. So in the state of Washington, the legislature passes three budgets every year. The first budget's the big budget, the one you're most familiar with. That's the operating budget. That's kind of the money in, money out for the state, right? That's kind of the operating expenses for the state. That's the big budget that balances every year. That's a good thing. Not every state balances their operating budget. We do. That's good. The operating budget is kind of the big budget. But there are two other budgets that the legislature passes every year as well. One is the transportation budget, which, as you might imagine, are transportation projects, right? Bridges, roads, ferries, right? Tangible transportation projects, okay? And then the third budget is the capital budget, which are also tangible projects, right? Things like parks and school buildings and university infrastructure, right? Like tangible capital projects. Well, for the transportation budget and for the capital budget, those tangible projects are funded through the issuance of things called bonds. And many of you are familiar with the idea of a bond, right? You hear school bond, you know, kind of that term, but I always break that down a little bit as well. So when we're talking about bonds, a bond is essentially government getting money up front for a particular project, and then it's paid back over the life of that project, right? So you have a bridge, you get the money up front, you build the bridge, you pay it back over the life of that bridge. You get, school building, whatever the case may be, money up front, you pay it back over the life of that project. It's kind of like with your home mortgage, right? You get the money up front, you buy your house, you pay it back over the life of your house. Your car loan, get money up front, you pay it back over the life of the car. Well, look, bonds are very much a responsible and accepted form of financing projects, right? And nearly every government does it. But what's important to remember is it still very much is a form of debt, right? You have to pay that back. And so that when we talk about debt management, it's not my job as treasurer to figure out what those projects are, right? That school building, that bridge, that road, that ferry, that's between you and your legislators to figure out what those particular projects are. My job is to actually issue the bonds and get the best financing on it, the best rate, the managing of that over the life of those bonds, trying to make sure that the financing costs are manageable. So that is the debt management part of the job. I always break that down because it's an important part of the job, but I always want to make sure folks kind of understand that concept. And then the third is I serve as the state's banker, right? So cash flow, money in, money out. I write the checks for the state of Washington. I get the checks in for the state of Washington. It's about $200 billion a year in terms of cash flow for the state. So I serve as the state's banker. But in addition to those kind of three core functions, I'm also responsible for certain financial policy for the state. And that's primarily done through the legislature directing me as treasurer to serve on certain boards and commissions. I'm automatically on certain kind of financial policy boards and commissions, some of which you might be familiar with, right? Our GET program or 529 program, where you can invest in your kids or grandkids' education. I serve on that. Our state investment board, which invests our $200 billion worth of state pensions. I sit on that board. Boards related to small business tax credits, other economic development things, housing financing, a range of different things kind of related to that. Banking regulation, I chair a board related to that. The long and short of it is, it's different members in all these boards, but I'm kind of a unifying presence on all these boards. I have made it a practice to personally attend all of these board meetings because it gives me a pretty good perspective on the overall financial health of the state of Washington. So that's kind of the financial policy kind of aspect of that work. But one of the things when I came into this office in 2021 is, I kind of met with the folks in our office, in the treasurer's office, and I said, hey, what's working well? What ideas do you have? What are things that we can do better? To the folks in our office. And they said, well, Mike, actually things are going pretty well. We have a good team. We know what we're doing. We're pretty competent. We've been doing this for a while. But the reality is every now and again, the legislature just kind of mucks things up for us. And I'm saying to myself, as I'm coming out of my second term of the legislature, I'm like, well, I'm more than aware of the fact that the legislature is capable of mucking things up every now and again. But I'm like, help me understand that. Like, people say things like that, but like, what do you really mean? Like help me, give me some context. And they said, well, Mike, in a lot of ways, a lot of laws are outdated. Some of these laws were written in the early 80s, in a different interest rate environment. Things need to be modernized. There are laws being passed that impact our office without considering the impact to our office, or laws are being passed that affect the financial health of the state of Washington without any consideration of that. I was like, well, that's something we can actually work with, right? Because as a statewide elected official, as the head of an agency, I can actually request legislation. We can actually impact the legislation before it passes to kind of make it work a little bit better for the financial health interests of the people of the state of Washington. So a big focus of that first short legislative session for me in the treasurer's office, and you might be familiar, we have a long legislative session. That's kind of the budget year. Then we have a short legislative session. During that first short legislative session, we introduced different legislation. Nothing too glamorous, nothing too exciting, not new projects or programs or anything like that, just kind of modernizing legislation, transportation funding modernization, making things work a little bit tighter, a little bit better, more efficiently. And we actually passed as many bills into law that we had put forward during that first short legislative session as the office had in the previous 5 years combined. And again, nothing too glamorous or exciting, just making things work a little bit better. And one of the things that was also very important for me, though, was recognizing kind of what my role is as state treasurer, which is it's not my job to determine what particular projects are, right? That's between you and your elected legislators, right? They control the purse. You are their constituents. They're in the legislative branch. They determine what those particular projects are. It's kind of like your state, I was mentioning I serve as a state's banker, right? It's not the job of your banker, and I'm sure we have some financial professionals here. It's not the job of your banker when you write a check for a new car and it passes through the bank for them to say, hey, I saw you just bought a new Subaru. You sure don't want the new Honda instead? It's a better model, right? It's not the job of your banker to kind of give you a call and kind of check in on that. It's the job to make sure that check is cut. But as the state's chief financial officer, as Kristine was pointing out, I do view my role as making sure that I'm providing good guidance and clear financial guardrails for the legislature in which to operate within. So again, it's between you and your legislators to figure out what those projects are, but I feel very strongly there needs to be financial guardrails in which the legislature is operating so that we know they're doing it in a responsible way. And we've done that in our office by putting forward very clear recommendations to the legislature as to the appropriate budgeting around those three budgets I was just talking about. And it's essentially almost like a three-legged stool for what's good for financial health, for good long-term fiscal stability. The first of that three-legged stool is very important. It's pension funding. Now look, I feel very strongly about pension funding, that folks have earned those pensions. We need to protect those pensions, and those pensions need to be available when they've been promised. So that's just foundational. But while that's very important, it's also critical to our financial health. Absolutely critical to our financial health, because there is no more expensive debt you can have than an underfunded pension liability. So you have to have a certain amount of money to meet your pension obligations. If that's underfunded, there's no more expensive debt you can have. And the reason for that is I was talking about the work that I do on the state investment board, where we're investing those pension funds. Well, we've been earning about an 8% return annually over decades now. But an 8% annual return. Now it varies in any given year, but over time it's about an 8% return. Well, if that money is not there to be invested, that is 8% you are losing right? And that's why there is no more expensive debt you can have than an underfunded pension liability, because the funds aren't there to be invested. And that's why the first recommendations that I made to the legislature of that three-legged stool of good financial health was that the legislature not only fully make the full actuarial contribution toward that pension obligation, right, the full obligation the legislature should make. I also recommended that the legislature put about $250 million toward the underfunded older pension plans that were in place. The legislature has followed that recommendation. What does that mean? It means, depending on how you calculate it, Washington State now has either the number 1 or number 3 best funded pension now in the country, right? Sure. Yeah, no, give it a round of applause. That's good. Like high five. It's always going to be number 1, right? Like it's always good to be number 1. But again, it's critical to our financial health, right? Critical to our financial health. And there are a lot of states and other governments in a real pickle when it comes to pension funding because they haven't done what they need to make sure that that funding is there. Number 2, second of that three-legged stool, is what we call debt service ratio. And I promise I'm going to break that down for you, right? Debt service ratio. So I was talking before about those bonds that have been issued, right? That is the debt for the state, the issuance of those prior bonds. Well, the debt service ratio is essentially the percentage of the total revenue coming from the state. So total revenue coming for the state, the percentage of that revenue that is being spent on your past capital debt payments, those past capital bond payments, right? Because those bonds have issued, you're paying them back. A certain percentage of the revenue you have coming in every year has to pay back those previous bonds. And that is the percentage of the total revenue. That's your debt service ratio, okay? So you think of it almost like your own individual checking account you might have any given month. Well, a certain percentage of that is going to pay debt, right? Your home mortgage, right? A car loan, right? That's a percentage of the total income you have coming in is paying previous debt. And obviously you want that to be as low as possible. You don't want it to be more than the income coming in. That's when things are going the wrong direction, right? But it kind of gives you some context, right? The lower the number, the better. Well, it's the same for government, right? You want that number to be at a manageable level. And we have a whole team that kind of charts that out. And we've identified that appropriate debt service ratio should not exceed within a 5 to 6% ratio. And so, and actually to this point, it's been a recommendation of about 5%, that the total debt, capital debt payments not exceed 5% of the total revenue that comes into the state. So you can kind of picture that as a percentage. Well, as you can also appreciate, there is no greater bipartisan cooperation in Olympia than the 2/3 supermajority vote necessary to issue new bonds. The legislature loves it, right? And as you can also appreciate, that affects that debt service ratio. More bonds, more debt, higher debt service ratio, less manageable. Well, look, I mean, it is a challenge, I can assure you, but you know, the recommendation that we've made clearly to the legislature, I'm very pleased that the legislature has followed our recommendation related to the debt service ratio. And what I will point out is that is not easy, because never once has a legislator at the end of a legislative session returned to their local Rotary, giving an update on Olympia and say, guess what? It's been a great session. Our debt service ratio is under 5%. And the entire room applaud and hoist them up on their shoulders and congratulate them on a great legislative session. You don't get a whole lot of love for that, right, as a legislator. But it is critical to our financial health, right? And so I'm very pleased the legislature has followed our recommendation related to that. The third leg of our three-legged stool relates to reserves. What are reserves? Reserves are essentially like the savings, right? That's the money left over that the state has that it's not spending, right? You might have reserves, right? It's kind of savings that you have. Well, the challenge was when I came into office in 2021, we were in the middle of the COVID economic recession. The legislature had spent all of the reserves for the state. Before you say, whoa, that's really scary, like what happened, nearly every government did that. That's what those reserves were for during economic recession, so that government services stayed stable, right? That the funding was there for essential services during those tough times when kind of revenue just fell off a cliff. But what do you need to do when times get good again, right? You need to replenish those reserves. You got to get them back. And so our recommendation was very clear that those reserves had to return to the pre-pandemic reserve level, which is at a minimum of 10% of the total revenue for the state, that there be a return to our pre-pandemic reserve level. Well, the problem was because the legislature had spent all of those funds, and up until that point, that reserve level had been automatically set by our Constitution over a period of a decade, right? So our Constitution essentially, before the money even gets to the legislature, takes a certain percentage and puts it into reserves. That's like automatic. Well, the problem was decades had passed, And the legislature never had to worry about it. The money showed up and they just spent. They never had to take money given to them and put it into reserves because it had been automatically set at a sufficient level. Well, I had to explain to them, you just spent it all, right? It's gone now. You need to take your new money and put it into reserves. Now, you want to talk about a challenge, trying to convince the legislature in the last couple of weeks of a legislative session to pull back a couple $1 billion they had earmarked for new projects and put it into reserves instead is not easy. I can promise you that is not easy. Because again, it's not the type of thing you get a whole lot of love for when you come back at the end of the legislative session. You're hearing from constituents about this or that, and you come back to your local Rotary and say, hey, good news, our reserves to our pre-pandemic levels. And again, hey, we applaud again. I thought debt service was great. This is fantastic. What a great session, right? But I'm very pleased that the legislature has followed that recommendation related to the reserve level as well. What does this mean? Well, again, we can kind of instinctively recognize that those are all positive things, right? Manageable debt, reserves back to pre-pandemic levels, best funded pension in the country. We can kind of instinctively understand that to be positive, but we're not the only ones looking at that. So we have independent credit rating agencies that do a review. Now, a credit rating agency is essentially kind of like you get a credit score, right? We all get a credit score. It helps determine whether or not people loan us money, how much money they're willing to loan us, at what interest rate they're willing to loan us money at. Well, the government has a credit score as well, but for reasons I can't explain, it's called a credit rating instead. And Moody's is one of the preeminent credit rating agencies. Well, Moody's just maintained and reaffirmed a AAA credit rating for the state of Washington. So that's the top credit rating that you can have. Again, like high five, it's good to be number one, like that. We can recognize that feels good. But what does that mean? Well, it means we get more bang for the buck. Right? When we issue bonds, it means we pay less in interest. We're wasting less in interest. We're getting more road, more school building, more ferry, more whatever the case may be at a lower rate because we're able to issue bonds at a cheaper rate than other states and other entities that have a higher interest rate and less strong credit. I mean, I just issued bonds, it was this week. I think it was probably 2 days ago, 1.3 billion, yesterday. Yesterday, I just issued new bonds, $1.3 billion in new bonds. For a range of capital projects, new broadband, new infrastructure, new schools, new housing, like you name it, based on what the legislature had passed. Well, not every state can just issue 1.3 billion and have people buy it, right? And have the money available when you need it. Like you need a new ferry when it's time to build it, being able to just issue that and have that new ferry where they say, here's $600 million for your new ferry at very low rates. That's the value of having strong credit. But it's also something that I've been able to take advantage of because when I first came into office, my kind of big focus during that first year was raising the alarm that I thought inflation would not be transitory. So when I came in 2021, raising the alarm, I thought inflation would not be transitory, meaning we would see it for an extended period of time, and that the Federal Reserve would have to respond to that by increasing interest rates to stem the tide of that inflationary pressure. Well, as you can appreciate, as you just heard, those interest rates affect everything we do in the Treasurer's office, right? It affects the investment side of our house. It affects our debt service or debt management side of the house. All of those things have an impact when it comes to those interest rates. And that's why during that first year, I was focused on, and have been ever since, refinancing every bit of debt that we could legally refinance in the state of Washington. So in the same way you can kind of refinance a home mortgage when interest rates are low, you can lock in lower interest rates. We can do the same at the state level related to those previous bonds, right? The debt that's been issued, and lock in very favorable rates. Well, we've been able to do that in a way in which we have now saved the people of the state of Washington over $550 million just in savings that was otherwise being wasted. I can't be any more clear, like burned in Wall Street interest payments, just totally burned. That is instead staying with the people of the state of Washington to do more good work based on what the legislators, in the communications you have with the legislators on how to spend it. But that it also means as interest rates have risen, we've also hugged that interest rate curve very tightly, which is a fancy way of saying that rate has gone up, so have our investment returns kind of in a similar way. Well, what does that mean? It means that the funds that we're investing on behalf of local governments are now 50 times what they were in 2021, at this time in 2021. You might have just said, he say 50 times. Yes, 50 times. I mean, the mayor can appreciate that in terms of for the local funds that we're investing on behalf of the city, right? You actually have an interest rate that's actually generating money. What does it mean? It means an extra $3 million more a day in new money going to local governments than at this time in 2021. $3 million more a day just in new money to meet those essential needs, to make sure that FTE is able to be filled, the potholes fixed, and we have the extra money for law enforcement or whatever, other first responders, and make sure that the funds are there to meet contract negotiations, you name it, that those services are able to be met. And so, look, I feel good about all of that, but I'll wrap up with just two things. The first is, I was talking about some other policy issues we're working on. One of the things that I've put forward and we'll be putting forward again this next legislative session is the fact that I believe that financial education needs to be required in our schools. And we are now one of a minority of states nationally that does not require financial education in our schools. Look, as I have had, I've been to each of our 39 counties, literally hundreds of meetings, talked to thousands, if not tens of thousands of people. I've yet to meet a single person in any speech that I've given where someone has said, hey, Mike, I got this financial education thing covered. Leave me alone. I don't need to know anything more about financial literacy. Totally got it covered, right? Everyone recognizes we need to know more about individually at an individual level. But here's the reality. For a lot of folks say, hey, wasn't I taught that in school? Well, it's not required now in school. And so there isn't even that foundational level where we're having people at age 18 going out in the universe. They don't know the difference between, interest rates on a loan compared to what credit card costs are and how you can get kind of wrapped around the axle on a lot of those things. And we need to provide that basic foundation related to that. And that's why I've put forward this legislation to finally require financial education in our schools. And I actually do want to point out, I think two of the representatives here for this district, Representative Eslick and Representative Lowe, are both co-sponsors of my legislation related to that. So I do want to give a shout out to them in particular for their support in this effort. But to me, this is just critical to being able to navigate in the world today. Critical. And I'm hoping that the legislature passes that this session. And then I'll wrap up with this and open up for any questions that you have, which is, I feel like our office is doing a lot, and I feel like we're doing it actually at a pretty high level, right? Both in terms of, when I talk about $1.8 billion in new money for the state over the next 4 years, right? So not only 50 times $3 million more a day for local governments, $1.8 billion in new money for the money we're investing on behalf of the state over the next 4 years. That's real money, $1.8 billion. An extra $3 million more a day for local governments, saving $550 million through the refinancing that we've done related to existing bonds. All of that work and the money that's being generated for the people of the state is being done by a relatively small office. My office is only about 70 people. It's one of the smaller statewide, it's one of the smaller state agencies for sure, and definitely one of the smaller of the statewide elected officials. I can assure you it is also one of the most efficient, and these folks are incredibly talented, many of whom have been doing this work for 10, 20, 30, 40 years or more. And every one of them, this is a fact, every one of them could be making 2, 3, 4 times or much doing the exact same work in the private sector. But they have dedicated their lives in many ways and this work in order to generate this money as a public service to the people of the state of Washington. So I always have one ask. It's the only ask that I give in every one of these talks, is that if you happen to bump into one of these 70 very talented folks in the office of the state treasurer, my only ask is that you thank them for their public service. And with that, I'm happy to open up for any questions you have. Carl.
Microphone. Thanks for coming out to Sedro Woolley. Really appreciate it. My question about the treasurers really is on a personal level and to an individual level about unclaimed property. How much is in the state of unclaimed property? I heard a number the other day of $2 billion. How do I get my money back?
God, I feel, Carl, who I've known in a range of capacities over the years, I almost feel like this was a plant, but it wasn't. And I appreciate the question. So he knows one of the things I love is telling people about unclaimed property. So unclaimed property, there is about $2 billion of your money that is currently sitting with the Governor's Department of Revenue. It's not in my office, but it's in the Governor's Department of Revenue. And I'm going to ask all of you right now, actually, feel free to take out your phones, claimyourcash.org. claimyourcash.org. About one in two Washingtonian families have unclaimed money they don't know about. 1 in 2. So, literally, we could make it rain here today, right? Like 1 and 2 Washingtonians, claimyourcash.org. Type in your last name. I guarantee you there are several people, if not more, here with unclaimed money that they don't know about. And the reality is people are like, oh, I don't have unclaimed money. I know where my checking account is. No, what happens is businesses now, when they issue you like a gift card or a reimbursement, or you have some insurance kind of repayment comes on, and maybe you move, move apartments, whatever the case may be, or went to the wrong address. That money actually is reverted from that company to the state to then be returned to all of you. Now, I feel it's not in my office, but it is money that is in the state treasury. So I feel very strongly about people at least knowing about this. So awesome. Thank you for that, Carl. That is awesome. Claimyourcash.org. Feel free to raise your hand already if you have money that you weren't expecting. But please take a look and don't feel bad. You won't be rude looking at your phone and tracking it down, because it makes me really happy when people have it. Next question.
Someone that takes care of them, watches the money coming in and going out. What are you worried about?
The question was kind of like, what are you worried about? I get that question a lot, kind of what keeps you up at night. Well, look, I mean, economies are fickle, right? I mean, things happen in a significant way in a lot of different ways. I mean, I'm also worried about the stability, just general stability. So much of our work is based on stability. The economy is premised on not having chaos and not having stability, or sorry, having stability and not having chaos. You're asking the question, I'll be honest. I mean, I think there's room for a lot of instability in the several months to a few years ahead in a way that is not conducive to a stable economy. It's just not. And all of that has an effect. And I think what we should be doing is looking more and more toward what is likely to lead to more stability, less chaos, and just more kind of just functioning government. I mean, honestly, and I don't know if I would have come up with that several years ago, but it's, things that are unstable are not helpful for the economy, and it affects, then the revenue for the state and our ability to deliver services. And, I'll also say, I mean, one of the things I'm already starting to look at is something that was a threat to the state about four years ago, which was, the federal government indicating at that time a desire to withhold federal dollars from certain states. Is that unlawful? Yes. Is that unconstitutional? Yes. Did that stop that from being proposed? No. The only thing that stopped it was individuals' U.S. Treasury Department saying, I'm not violating the law. I have concerns about that. I really do. And that could be incredibly disruptive to the state and our ability to just function, people to get their educations, and just literally roads to be built and just bridges to be built. I mean, stability is a good thing, and I'm always worried about those things. Yes.
Couple questions. A few years ago when the pandemic hit, we had a lot of fraud going on where people were claiming other people's accounts in the state of Washington. And I don't remember what the number was, but it was a huge number. Just curious as to how much has been reclaimed and kind of talk about that. Second thing I appreciate the financial literacy piece that you're going after. Question I have for that though is there a replacement? Are you reducing the other amounts or any other classes that students are required in that legislation you're proposing?
Great. Two really good questions. So I'm going to answer the second one first, because I remember that one the most, and I'm going to ask you to repeat the first one. So the second one was essentially like, hey, your financial education is only so much room during the day for teaching. Like, well, is this cutting into something else? So a lot of school districts have already incorporated financial education into the current core requirements. What we're saying is there are a couple different ways the schools can do this. One is kind of incorporating financial education to more practical training in existing subjects. So you could have math, for example, instead of just doing math equations, it's actually doing compound interest rates or how interest rates could work negatively toward you in a very practical way. The other aspect is something that actually our team's working on. Actually, we just met, I think, yesterday in the office in our financial education team on this, which was the idea of having more practical training as a part of existing curriculum. So junior achievement, for example, in Auburn, Washington, they have an entire facility that includes, folks from all around the state, including from up here, go down to Auburn to have a days-long training where they have set up an entire city where it's like they have a bank and they have a business and they have a mayor's office. They have literally the entire city there. And as a part of curriculum that was already existing in the classroom, they teach them, they prepare for that, and then everyone takes a role in that class, in that business community, like okay, I'm running the store. I don't have any money. Someone needs to buy something. Now I have money. I go to the bank. I have the funds. I have that. I'm actually earning interest on that. And now I'm able to purchase more product. And, and then people have money, they get revenue and they can actually buy things, literally buy things. They have like a Mariners store and you can buy like Mariners hat with the money you have. It's really cool. And then Boys and Girls Club, the Peninsula, they have setups around this too. So there are ways to integrate kind of practical curriculum as well. And that's one of the things we're actually hashing out as to how best to do that as a part of the legislation next year. So there are different components, but all of which I very much recognize there's only so many hours during the day and it's not just tacking on or replacing anything. Oh, and I'm sorry, the first question related to fraud. Thank you. So the first question now I do recall is related to what happened in 2000 during the pandemic, where ESD, Employment Services Division, was sending checks out to folks who didn't exist. And there was a lot of fraud. I mean,
It was actually when people started claiming unemployment, people grabbing other people's accounts.
right, exactly. And through Employment Services Division, yeah, ESD. So ESD issues the checks related to, the unemployment that was claimed related to that. So I will say this, one, couple different pieces of this. The ESD checks are one of the only, if not potentially the only checks that issue in the state, not through my office. I can't explain why that is. That was set up a long time ago. I'll also say, and I always point that out because my predecessor, it was not his fault when that was happening in the treasurer's office. That was through ESD. That said, I feel very strongly about these issues because one of the things Kristine was saying in my bio is I was an assistant attorney general managing efforts related to financial fraud and government fraud. And so I think about these issues a lot within our office in terms of the checks we issue. And I'm very proud of the fact that actually we haven't lost any funds in terms of the checks that have been issued through our office during this time, even though you have kind of one-off fraud that takes place, right? The idea of people, hey, I'm creating pretend checks and things like that we've been able to pull that back every time that's been issued. To answer your question directly, a lot of that money has been returned, but not all of it has been, as I understand it. Now, again, it's not outside my office, so I generally have a rule, which is if I don't know an exact number, I don't make it up. But what I can tell you is while a significant majority of the funds have been recovered, because so much money was lost, that's still a lot of money lost to taxpayers. And it's why we need to stay vigilant on this and make sure there's accountability. And importantly, that we learn from it. Because one of the other things we've done in our office is because we touch all state agencies, as the state's banker, we send the money where they tell us to send it. So if an agency is giving us bad information, right? If that agency's been swindled, like the money is directed to where that agency tells us. Well, we actually did a training on that because lo and behold, while it seems obvious to me, it was not obvious to a lot of those agencies. And by even just doing a training like that, it created much more clarity as to, guess what, folks? If you as an agency head direct us to send a money somewhere, you're sending it to the wrong place. Well, then suddenly folks are like, well, we better develop some controls on that. And even steps like that to me are helpful just to increase the accountability in government when people know who's accountable. So it doesn't become a, oh, I thought you, I thought this, and then people kind of point fingers in a way that isn't good for good government. Yes.
First off, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. I'm an accountant, so you're speaking my language.
All right. Well, one of my people here. This is great. Thank you for being here.
And so my first question is, I've been around a long time at this Rotary Club, and I've never had the treasurer come visit us. So why are you here now? And the second question is, our roads are beyond deteriorating. They're now getting dangerous. Like I've reached out to the Department of Transportation, said I've had 3 times where I've almost gotten in an accident because of roads, and they responded, said, well, you need to talk to your legislators about money. So can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so let me answer the first question first. I mentioned, I think this is my 53rd or 54th Rotary. I committed maybe about halfway through those, that these have been so great as a great way to connect with community leaders, that I'm committed to visiting every Rotary in the state, And I'm probably about maybe 7 Rotaries away from getting through the first third of all the Rotaries. Right, there are a lot, and it's going to take me time, but I appreciate you being available to connect. And it truly is, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I remember, as a statewide elected official, it's actually harder to connect with folks than you might think, right? It's not like you can go around and start knocking on everyone's door. You can't just like walk in the local grocery store and say, hey, I'm Mike, like, hey, what's on your mind? right? Like, but I go to Rotaries and actually I hear good questions, right? I hear comments, and it's usually from community leaders within the community that I'm in. So that's sorry it's taken me so long to get here, but over the last 2 years, this is I think my 54th, and I appreciate you being available to connect today. As to the second question, which is general maintenance issues on the roads, which I think the heart of what you're getting at, it's something I actually feel strongly about, because I think for far too often it's the type of financing aspect that's easy to overlook, right? Because people want to get like, let's get the project going. Well, part of the project is recurring maintenance expenses over a long period of time. You can build a road and the road's built. Well, you know, the road needs to be maintained, and there are costs associated with that that might not be part of the initial construction of that road or the bridge, or whatever the case may be. And it becomes very fairly easy for legislators or others to not dedicate the funding necessary to those larger aspects. And I think it's one of the things that particularly frustrates folks, because it's the type of thing where you hit a pothole and you're like, oh, here's government not working, right? I'm paying all these taxes, I can't, I'm like, here's the pothole, right? It's like a constant reminder, right? And so to me, it's an important part of just making sure government's working and functional with that, but it is a part of things that need to be financed. Now, as Treasurer's Office, we don't put together either the contracts or the financing arrangements for a transportation project. It's the Governor's Department of Transportation. Our job is when the financing is, or when the project is ready to be built, we are directed and we need to come up with the money, like at the time in which they need it, right? And that's why, again, that credit rating is so critical, because we need to, on a moment's notice, be able to say, you need $700 million, you're ready for this? Boom, here you go. And that we're getting it at an affordable rate, and there's a lot of competition for those bonds in a way that make it affordable. And you're not just trying to piecemeal or do a negotiated sale. We do, in most cases, a competitive sale for our bonds, which not every state can pull off, where you can put that out, have enough bidders that you're getting very good rates. So, I mean, to answer your question, I think there are two larger financial issues. This goes back to the heart of your question as well, in terms of issues going on to be worried about. In the short term, the biggest financial issue facing the state, I think, is education funding, and the legislature needing to revisit the formulas involved with education allocations and the funding related to that. The good news is most legislators get that I talked to, and I think this next legislative session is going to be the main focus of that session. Longer term, and when I say longer term, I mean over the next 5 to 10 years, I think the biggest challenge we're going to see financially is on transportation funding issues more generally. You know, the bonds that issue related to transportation funding rely on gas tax as the revenue source to pay back those bonds. Well, as cars become more efficient, well, that means less revenue coming in related to the gas tax, right? Which is already the most expensive in the state, or in the country, right? So it's significant. And so what does that look like? I think they're going to have to develop kind of a path related to that, right? And that's a longer term path. Now, the good news is, in a bipartisan way, legislators are coming together, and I've joined a lot of those meetings where they're starting to recognize, hey, over the next 5 to 10 years, what are we going to do on this effort? But what I also hear from constituents, it's on the maintenance stuff, right? Because folks, and depending on where you are in the state, it's particularly pronounced. And I think that needs to be a part of that equation, because otherwise it's easy to overlook. No. Mayor.
So as some of you know, we finished up a major public works building project back in December of 2022, and it was just really shy of $5 million. Well, I want you to know that it was actually your department that supplied $4 million of that. And for that, we were very grateful. The city of Sedro Woolley is very grateful. So we've actually seen that money come back. And I have to say, personally, I am very honored that you are here today. Oftentimes we send people off to Olympia or even to the federal government, and we may never see them again, but it's an honor that you've made the effort to come today. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mayor, for those comments. I will say, I want to talk about that program because it's important. There's a good chance there are a lot of other leaders on school boards or library districts or fire districts that are here as well. The program we're talking about that finance that is some that relies a lot on our good credit, which is we actually pool together a lot of local projects, library districts, fire districts, might be a new fire truck or an ambulance or a building or whatever the case may be. And instead of going through some national bank and paying 14% interest or 12% interest, we use our state's good credit. We pull all those projects together, use our state's good credit and put it out on the market and get a very favorable rate in which that is passed back to taxpayers. This is particularly important actually in more rural communities where you have a lot of different fire districts and school districts and things like that. Is hugely impactful. And so I feel really good about this program. It's one of the reasons I go around a lot and talk about these issues. I was meeting with Vince earlier today, as Ruth can appreciate. I was meeting with Vince earlier today, the local paper, talking about a lot of these projects because I want local districts, government districts to know about this because this is ultimately money that's passed back to taxpayers when we do it the right way. Yes.
Question. My customers use the state revolving fund loan programs for drinking water and infrastructure. Are those programs healthy and are they going to be around forever theoretically? And one complaint I have about them is that we seem to grant an awful lot of money. And if we wouldn't grant it, we would just build and build and build and build. And then the legislature wouldn't have to seed it after a while, at least theoretically. Can you comment on any of that?
Well, those are things that are not run through our office, but what I will say is in the larger context of kind of the public works fund efforts as well, where we have seen a lot of those efforts swept every year by the legislature in terms of those funds that are there. And I think that that's been particularly frustrating for what could be a lot of different loans set up where things could work. It's not that the will isn't there, and that's why it's always there, and it's the funding's there to make sure it works. But really, from a long-term standpoint, it really needs to be set up. Like the Public Works Trust Fund, for example, it's another example where you can get funds for local projects. That is swept every year by the legislature, and it really limits the amount of funds that could otherwise be there, and actually delivered in a very efficient way. So, and again, I mean, it's why within our office we do what we can within the systems that we have within our office, and why I go around to make those available, because those financing tools often are filling that gap. It's more challenging on the water side, which kind of limits a lot of the options because you need to have a revenue source to do it. So if you're a city, you have the revenue source to be able to make the payments, or a school district or whatever it is. So I mean, in terms of funds being there, I mean, obviously, as long as the will is there, the funds continue to be there. But it is a challenge. I'm happy to follow up specifically with additional questions you have. Okay, great. Yeah.
I'm currently working with several school districts in the Northwest, specifically about Baker School District, binding conditions, working closely with Whatcom County Treasurer, put a plug in for those guys. They've done some great work.
Steve Oliver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so my question is, all of these school districts that I've been working with, and I'm currently at the Mount Baker, they're in financial distress. And what are you hearing from other county treasurers, and what's the messaging going to our legislators about school districts?
Yeah, well, that is a lot to unpack with the last question. I mentioned to you education funding, I think, is going to be the biggest challenge. I mean, the whole idea of McCleary, remember the McCleary fix? That was about 4 or 5 years ago. Everyone knew at the time that was a temporary fix. Everyone understood that. That was communicated. Well, here we are now, 5, 6 years later, right? And there's going to be a need to address it. I actually spoke last week in Vancouver to the County Treasurers Association, and I talked about this issue. And it's the county treasurers who get the question first, right? Even though they have the least to do with it, they're the first person that a school district is going to come to in terms of when there are funding issues with that. And I think there's a lot to unpack in the education funding. You got issues related to the 60% bond issue, where you have certain districts haven't passed a bond in decades now to shore up certain existing bonds. It's like they're passing at 58%. It doesn't get the job done. And so now they're having to come up with those funds elsewhere. You add to that the fact that some school districts spent more than they probably should have based on a lot of the revenue projections that were coming in for them. You add that to the fact that the McCleary formula is not in alignment to deal with the long-term issues that need to happen, and there needs to be more money coming from the state. I mean, there's a lot that needs to be unpacked. The good news is, while this is the legislature's purview on how best to set this up, I am confident. I am increasingly confident that this session they're going to address what is a range of issues. And look at Marysville. I mean, there are no shortage of issues that are popping up, and each school district in some ways is a little bit different, but there are obviously unifying larger issues that are in place. And there's some binding restrictions being put in place in school districts, where other school districts are getting close to that, which is essentially kind of the final stopgap to make sure that the school district is solvent. I mean, there's a lot. So when I say the two issues, short-term school education, and I'm cautiously optimistic the legislature is going to take that on head on this session. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join all of you today. Appreciate it.
Thank you for being here today, Mr. Pellicciotti.
It took me a lot longer to learn it. That was
That's-
really good. That's great.
I practiced a long time, but so before you go, thank you for visiting our Rotary Club today. You said that this is your 54th Rotary Club, so I'm glad that you could experience the best club in the universe. And to help you on your endeavors in check writing, I'm going to give you a pen so that you can, I don't know, write some more checks for the city of Sedro Woolley. To pass the gavel. It's a bittersweet day. Thank you again so much for being here. So I'm glad that we were able to schedule that in. All right. Now we get to reverse it and go into club business since we skipped over that so that we could have that. You guys asked really great questions. So good job, guys. Okay, club business installation is tomorrow. That's really the only thing that I have on the agenda. So I can't wait to pass the gavel to Ruth tomorrow at 5:30. And then Kyle and Brock need a couple of moments to talk about the foot race.
Hey, the foot race is coming up in like 1 week. So we need to get a little bit more organized here for the foot race. So if you weren't here last week and you can do a street corner, I need probably about 10 people to help out. So let's see, Phil, I think you were here last week, but so you're on board. Let's see, Chris, I think we're going to put, did you say you're going to be in the parade? Can't do a foot race up State Street? No, have to be there at 9. Okay. Rebecca, yeah, perfect. Rebecca needs a big round of applause. I don't know, how much did you raise from sponsorships? It was a lot. You got like 12 sponsors, so thanks, job. Okay, so let's see where's Kenny Van Loob. Were you here last week? No. Yeah. You're going to be on a corner, all right? Okay. Get you in there. Okay, so I'm gonna be putting out an email probably tomorrow that'll have all the assignments so far. If you see an open spot, that'd be appreciated if you call or email back and let me know that you can help out. And Steve, were you gonna help this guy open up the gym? Okay. Or Swagger? Okay, perfect. Okay, anybody else want to try to help? I can put you on the spot.
I have 2 volunteers. They can either be together on a corner or you can separate them if you need more people. So
Okay, so when I send the email out, just send me their names and we'll get them put in the spot. And Maggie said she's going to be able to help. So, this time next week we'll all be done but the shouting. So appreciate all the help. Kyle, how many runners so far? So 251 so far. That's actually pretty good a week out. So going to be busy. Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks everybody.
all righty. Let's see. Do we have a raffle? We've got to do the fun stuff too.
$70. CarQuest. Number 7.
Oh. All right.
Now, Monique, you get a chance to spin or whatever anything you want here or spin.
We have a headshots and happy hour coming up in August. I'll just
Okay. $74.
Well, all right then.
Uh-oh. Hellman's Vineyard Wine and Cheese Plate. Last one, 33.
All right, it paid to be a guest at Rotary today.
Oh, same one as the past one. Hillman's Vineyard and Wine and Cheese.
All righty, thank you. Okie dokie. Let's see, we're gonna move into Sergeant of Arms and Happy Bucks. Joellen?
Okay, who's happy?
So yesterday in the afternoon, we had a open house for Mark Freiberger, who is our Director of Public Works. He is retiring after actually 17 years in Sedro Woolley, but a career that actually spanned over 30 years. It was absolutely amazing. We're sad to see him go, but we wish him the very best. And just one shout out to him, something that we wanted to point out to the public, and I'd like for you to know too, that he set out some of his best drawings. He set out some of his best projects that he has done over the 17 years he's been here. And of those 17 years, that was over $60 million worth of projects. And that was just the ones that he had set out. That was not the other projects that included that. So really an extraordinary man. We've been really blessed here in Sedro Woolley. And so I'm giving a happy 20 for him.
I have to give my 20 for your year, Kristine, and excited for Ruth to come up. I know you guys did a lot of work behind the scenes, managing everything and everyone, so I appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
I love being in a small town because I had some friends from out of town, and it was supposed to rain yesterday. It did rain, and I said, "Well, I tell you what, we'll go to the museum." It was closed. So I called Joellen and she opened up the museum and we had a beautiful private tour and it was great in the museum. If you haven't been there, I hadn't been there in 20 years, you need to go. It is awesome. There you go.
I just got a few books because I didn't get a chance to do a plug. Concert series posters are on the table. Please, please, please help me get them out to local businesses to put in the windows. I do have a few more in my car, but I need everybody's help to get those posted, especially before the Big Logger Rodeo and all the events in town. So please help. Thanks.
So I'm on vacation technically. And it's been a great a bit of time off, but yesterday I spent about 8 hours on Rotary business. So some of the things I did yesterday was update the website calendar. I fixed our website address on the District 5050 page. God only knows how long that's been wrong. So it now actually takes you to our website. So that's exciting. But happy 10, just because I'm very excited to be your president next year, but also I'm very blessed to have the team that we've had this year on the board and then the team that's going to be there next year. We have a really strong club, and it's very obvious whenever you meet with folks outside of our club how great we actually are. And we're very lucky to have one another as friends and colleagues. So there's my happy 10.
I have a happy 5 because I have friends from college that are visiting me this weekend, and we haven't all been together since before COVID. So very excited.
Yay. I am going to Venmo a happy 50 because that's how happy I am to be passing the gavel to Ruth, but also if you haven't been president, and they might have changed it a little bit, but at the beginning of every year, you're supposed to, or of your Rotary year, you're supposed to set goals. And in order to earn a presidential citation, your club has to set and meet at least 13 goals. And I sat down on Wednesday and I updated our goals, and I am very happy because none of it would have happened without our membership. We met 14 of the 14 goals that I set for our club. So thank you guys. And just to reiterate what Ruth said, we have a great board and we have a great, strong club, and it's very evident by the things that we do. So thank you guys for a great year. I've really appreciated being your president, and I've enjoyed the support and really appreciated it. So thank you.
So a trucking announcement. Last week I talked about needing a truck, and Jim Dillon said he would help, but it's such a big task because I think we have 40 pallets of nitrile gloves free that we want to give to all of the emergency service locations in the whole area. I would like to request, and I'll do this afterwards, that the club just pay for the trucking. It's $1,300, and so I think that'd be a way better way than to try to have Jim go down 16 times to get all those pallets. So anyway, but that's kind of a cool, odd donation. So anyway.
Okay, is anybody else happy? Oh. Thank you, guys. I appreciate that. Thank you. I do have, don't worry, I have one last joke for you. And then after I ring the bell, I would like to invite everybody out to the Memorial Park because our picnic shelters are finished. So thank you to, I know Chris was there and Dan was there, and Curtis Medler was there and Eric was there, and they helped finish the backfill so it can officially be opened. So I hope that you'll join me for a ribbon cutting after the meeting. Becky's got the mic though.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know, I found a picture when I was moving from 20 years ago of our Rotary Club. So it's on the table there if you guys want to check it out. And the festivities are going to start tomorrow evening at 5:30 here. We're going to have an hour of social time, an hour and 15, and then we'll do dinner and the program.
Thank you. Sorry, I forgot to say that. Okay. Any other announcements for the good of the order? And it's okay if you don't, you'll get two. If you're here today and you're here tomorrow, you'll get two jokes because I've got a joke for tomorrow night too. So don't worry. Okay, so Mother Superior tells two new nuns that they have to paint their room without getting any paint on their clothes. One nun suggests to the other, hey, let's take off all our clothes, fold them up, and lock the door. So they do this and begin painting their room. Soon they hear a knock at the door. They ask, who is it? Blind man. The nuns look at each other, and one nun says, well, he's blind, so he couldn't see. What could it hurt? So they let him in. The blind man walks in and says, hey, nice boobs. Where do you want me to hang the blinds?